Okay. Hey everyone. Okay, welcome. And hope you all had a good public holiday today. I'm sure some of you also ran. A lot of you ran. There's a lot of people that did Wally Hayward. So I'm going to try and keep the session as brief as possible to allow for questions, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions based on the kind of emails that I'm getting on a daily basis. And if you have been emailing me and I haven't responded, I do apologize. It's just that I get dozens of emails every single day. Actually, not dozens, more than 100 a day. And it's very difficult to keep up with all of that. So I'm hoping this will answer a lot of questions. I am recording the session. Just a couple of things. Uh, for those of you that are watching the session live now, I think our marketing team will send out a nice gift voucher for you guys to utilize on the online site. As well as we will be sending out a nice fueling guide, which you can also utilize as a foundation or basis as you build up to Comrades and finalize your fueling strategy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to approach your race fueling. And I'm not just going to go straight into the nitty and gritty of everything. I think it's very important for you to understand how the human body works. And there's a lot of misconceptions. And so I'm going to explain to you things in the most simplest way that I possibly can. If there are any questions, I will allow for that. You can just let me know in the chat, and in the chat, I will go through those questions as I'm going through the presentation, and I am going to allow for a Q&A session at the end. So just a bit of an introduction. My name's Mark Wolff. I'm one of the co-founders of 32GI. I've been in the endurance space for close on 30 years. I've been in the nutrition space for over 25 years. With a focus on human performance. My focus is really sports physiology, um, understanding of obviously human anatomy, human immune system, blood chemistry experts as well. I love to understand the human body in depth, and my biggest focus is actually athlete health. Although obviously I do put a huge focus on nutrition in and around training, as well as uh, exercise, fueling, and race fueling, which obviously plays a very vital role as far as nutrition goes. And this is where the focus is going to be this evening. Okay, so I think we must just start off by understanding how the human fuel tanks work. You know, the human body's got an energy system, and this energy system works in quite an amazing way. And once you understand how the energy system works and how it taps into the different kinds of fuel tanks, which serve up sources of energy that you can utilize to be able to exercise, to perform, you'll better understand how you should approach your fueling. And I hope to tie all of these little puzzle pieces together so you can try and understand it in detail and then build out your own fueling strategy. Okay, so firstly, if we look at the human body, there's two primary fuel tanks. The one fuel tank, which is on the left-hand side, there is our glycogen fuel tank. These are the human body's carbohydrate stores. Primarily, our glycogen stores are sitting in skeletal muscle, so basically in your muscles. And there is also a portion of it which is sitting inside of the liver. And both of these are utilized as a source of fuel under high intensity exercise conditions. I generally call the glycogen tank the rocket fuel tank. Um, and you can actually see it. It's only has about a volume of 2,000 calories, plus or minus, approximately. And so that means that you're limited for how long you can utilize this fuel tank. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. If you take a look now at the fat fuel tank, you'll see that it is massive. It's about 40,000 calories. You could run 50 consecutive marathons if you could tap into this fuel tank only. And what's quite amazing about the fat fuel tank is that it is an amazing natural energy source, but it can only be utilized under certain conditions. And where do you find fat as a source of fuel in the human body? Intramuscular triglycerides, so this is fat that sits in between the muscles. You'll predominantly find that more in endurance athletes. Adipose tissue as well, which is the fat that sits underneath the surface of the skin. And then you've also got free fatty acids, or FFAs as we call them, And then obviously there's other fat that's situated within the body, things like visceral fat, etc. But most of the fat that's utilized and broken down when it comes to exercise would be free fatty acids, I guess, because they're floating around. And adipose tissue can be broken down and utilized as a source of fat, and then obviously intramuscular triglycerides as well. Okay, so these are the two primary fuel tanks. There is a third fuel tank. It is not a primary fuel tank by any means, and we are going to touch on it a little bit later. And that fuel tank is actually protein. Yes, protein can be utilized as a substrate within the energy system to provide energy. It can be used as a fuel source, and we'll talk about that later. It's not something that's desirable, but it can be utilized, and at the onset of certain conditions, under a process called gluconeogenesis, it does become active. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. Can you still hear me, everyone? Okay, I see somebody said that they can't hear me. I am sitting on a wired 200 meg fiber connection, so I hope that it's okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how the human body now utilizes these fuel tanks that I've spoken about. So if we break down the different kinds of zones that we would be exercising at, and what is a zone? A zone is a percentage. You could call it a range of intensity, and we'll use that as a percentage of maximum heart rate. If you're looking at heart rate zones, that is the best way to define how intense a person is performing at based on the level of his heart rate at that particular moment in time. And there's various levels of heart rate zones, and each individual is unique into what his maximum heart rate is. Yes, there's a standard 220 minus your age, etc., and you can try and break it down, but in some cases that doesn't work. My max heart rate, for example, is around 184, and my age is just under 53, 52 years of age. So if you take 220 minus my age, you'll find that my max heart rate is actually quite a bit higher than what's defined as a standard. So, those are things that you can work out, and you can try and work backwards to see what your heart rate zones are. They differ for each individual. But if we're looking at the different zones, and I'm just using simply 5 zones, zone 1 is what we call a nearly pure fat burn zone. And if you have a look at the fuel tank there, you'll see the yellow circle is primarily fat, and then a little bit of white carbohydrate. So that sits about 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate, and that's just approximate. And when you're in that zone, you're basically in a pure fat burn zone. If you're looking at zone 2, which is your aerobic zone, that's 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. You'll notice that fat is still your primary fuel source, and your carbohydrate stores can be utilized, but a very small amount. You're still in primarily, you're still in a fat burn zone, and that's also a very low carb burning zone. Once you move into zone 3, the picture changes quite significantly. Actually, zone 3 becomes what we call a glycolytic zone. Glycolytic means that it becomes glycogen burning. In other words, you're burning off quite a large amount or a fairly high percentage of carbohydrates, and you're also burning off a large amount of fat. So this is like a bit of a no man's land because you're burning both off at a rapid rate. Your fat stores will last you longer, but you are depleting glycogen here. And remember, your glycogen fuel tank is quite limited. Excuse me. Zone 4 is primarily a carbohydrate burn zone. Zone 4 is basically upper threshold anaerobic. Once you move into these anaerobic zones, which are zone 4 and 5, you're hardly burning any fat, and you're burning off carbohydrates at quite a rapid rate. And that would be 80 to 90% of your maximum heart rate. And then if you're moving into zone 5, you're talking close to 100%, 90 to 100% of your maximum heart rate. So that's how we sort of define the zones. So based on what I'm showing you here, if you think about it, if you're going to do an exercise session, whatever that training session or that race session is going to be, you should have an idea of the kind of zone that you're going to be performing in. So if you're doing a recovery run, that would more be a zone 1 effort. Do you need to fuel in a zone 1 session? Well, no, I've got natural fat stores. I can go in a faster training session. I don't really need to fuel for that session. Zone 2, also primarily a a fat burn zone. That's more aerobic. Do you need to fuel? Well, we'll get into that, but it depends on the duration of the session. But once you move into zone 3, 4, and 5, and you start to burn off your carbohydrate stores, fueling becomes a lot more important. Okay. In short, the way you determine your fueling strategy is when you're doing high intensity sessions, which I basically mentioned is more your zone 3 upwards. Those sessions deplete glycogen at a more rapid rate. And in order to slow that down and preserve them as much as possible, you need to ingest carbohydrates. So anyway, those carbohydrates will ultimately be converted quite quickly into glucose and then utilized as a source of energy to produce adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP, to fire up those muscles and allow them to perform. When you're doing lower to medium intensity sessions, you burn a much higher rate of fat to glycogen, which means that if fat is the predominant fuel source, you should probably take advantage of it from a health perspective, and you don't need to overfuel. You can actually go on a lower fueling to no fueling strategy. Okay, I drew this infographic quite a few years ago, but it's actually quite a significant one, and I quite like it because it actually describes everything I've been speaking about in a simple picture. If you look at the left side, you'll see there's aerobic, right side anaerobic. You'll notice the two fat tank and glycogen tanks, and you'll find the fat tank is mainly used when you are in that aerobic zone. You can see low carb zone 1, 2. But as you push through those zones and you go into the high carb zones, glycogen is up, and that requires a slightly higher carb feed. Okay. So if I go back to these fuel tanks and I look at zone 1, zone 1 is a pure fat burn zone. If I'm going for a session that's less than 2 hours, I can just go on water. If I'm going for a session that might be greater than 2 hours, I'd probably introduce some low carb intake. And the reason being is that over that period of time, first of all, you're burning off calories from the time you wake up in the morning. That's standard, what we call RMR, rest metabolic rate. So if you are going for an extended period of time, you do need to actually take in some fuel because you need to fuel yourself for the recovery post-exercise. A lot of people that train fasted, they tend to forget that it does impact their ability to recover because it could be an extended period of time where they're actually not consuming anything. So sometimes fueling is not just about performance, but it's also about the recovery phase. If you're going in zone 2, less than 2 hours, yes, you can go on water. You can go and do a zone 2 effort, you can go on water. Once you're going greater than 2 hours, definitely ingest carbohydrates. Maybe you'd even want low carb 90 minutes upwards. You do need to be careful here because when you are going for a period that's greater than 2 hours, your core body temperature will climb. Sometimes also temperature, external temperature, weather can actually climb. It can get hotter. And that will also cause core temperature to climb. And that will create what we call cardiac drift. In other words, heart rate will just naturally elevate over time. If you ever looked at a nice stable heart rate graph, you'll notice that it's never flat, flat, flat. But you'll notice that as you get further into the exercise session, the longer you go, even if it's the same pace or the same effort, you'll find that the heart rate starts to climb over time. And that's because the heart has to work a little bit harder. It has to divert blood to the surface of the skin to trigger what we call the sweating mechanism, which is actually your cooling engine to try and help the human body get cooler. As you lose more fluid, so the blood actually does start to thicken a little bit, and the body has to work even a lot harder. And so it elevates heart rate. And that's why also hydration plays a very important role, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Once you're going into zone 3, notice less than 2 hours, I'm already saying to you, go, if it's a pure zone 3 session, if you're going to go tempo effort, etc., then already you're going to introduce carbohydrates pretty early on. If you're going greater, you can even go lower to much higher carb intake. Fuel tanks, when it comes to zone 4, definitely only carbohydrate intake. Zone 5, only carbohydrate intake. You can't go over zone. There's no ways you can go for very long periods in zone 5. It's not going to happen. Those are more your interval sessions. That's really taking your heart rate quite high. Very few people can ever hold that for a very extended period of time. Okay. Are there any questions there at the moment? I'm just going to run through the chat and just see. Uh, okay, nothing really at the moment. Okay, I'll keep scanning the section for questions, but again, if you want to ask him at the end, feel free. We'll get through them. I had a bit of a cold, so I'm over it. I think there's a bad flu going around, so you guys must be careful. But yeah, set me back for a few days, but I am getting this. I cough a little bit. Apologies. Okay. You always need to fuel for effort, and this is what I tell athletes. A lot of people they just go out and they run. They they might think that they're not putting in an effort, but they actually are. You're going out for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours, or you're doing a double session. You definitely need to fuel for effort. If you if you want to perform, if you ingest carbohydrates, it will aid and improve your ability to perform. Your numbers will be way better if you ingest carbohydrates. Why is that important? Because if you fuel yourself, if you can push yourself harder because of that fuel, if you can do more muscle damage, you will, when you recover, progress at a much more rapid rate. Training adaptations will be way superior to those people that do not fuel. The people that just do faster training are putting themselves on the back foot. They're not really able to tap into their full potential. And then the other thing is if you're doing faster training, it is going to set you back from a recovery perspective. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes ingesting a fuel pre or during a session is a means of aiding recovery. Because if you're going to go out and burn off 700 calories an hour, and you're going to go for 2 hours, and you're going to land up burning off 1,000 to 1,500 calories after a session. Adding your rest metabolic rate could be between 1,700 to 2,000. You're already burning off 3,500 calories in a day. How are you going to get that fuel back in? It's not like you can just go and start eating. If you'd fueled in your session, you'd feel a lot more stable. You won't overeat the wrong things, and you'll be a lot more stable during the day. So that's why it's quite important not just to think of fueling as a means for performance, but also a means for recovery. Okay. All right, let's look at some practical fueling strategies. Okay, just checking the questions again before going. Okay, practical fueling strategy. Let's go into a little bit more detail now. Are there any questions before on fuel tanks? Is anybody that's got any questions, just feel free to ask, and I'll answer them. Okay, this is where it starts to get interesting. Carbohydrate fueling recommendations. So this is actually a chart that was taken from Asker Jukendrup, who's a sports scientist, and I'll credit my sports science site. Very useful scientific data that they're always putting up. But when you're ingesting carbohydrates, the standard guidelines for sports nutrition are around 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Now, it was always like that for a very long period of time. And then athletes started moving towards the 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Now, if you're ingesting 30 grams of carbs per hour or 60 or 90, generally a lot of people base how much you should be ingesting on the time that you're out there. So if you have a look at this chart, you'll see that the carbohydrate recommendation for 0 up to 60 minutes is really pretty much fasted. You'll see small amounts of a mouth rinse. A mouth rinse, by the way, there's a mouth rinse test that they did many years ago. They took two groups of athletes. They put them, they were cyclists or triathletes, but they were doing a cycling test. They split the groups up. They made the one group ingest carbohydrate, and they actually found that another group not ingest the carbohydrate, and they found the group that ingested carbohydrates finished the time trial a lot quicker than those that did not ingest the carbohydrate. So that is a bonus for carbohydrate ingestion and aiding performance. Then what they did was they took those two groups, and the one group, they said, you must sip on the carbohydrate drink, but do not swallow the carbohydrate drink. Rinse it in your mouth, spit it out. Okay? The other group swallowed. And what they found was that there was equal performance improvements in both groups. So what does that mean? The minute the carbohydrate hits your tongue, it triggers a neurological response, which actually helps already improve performance. It's like the brain knows what's coming into the body. So it's a little trick that gets utilized to help improve performance, and they proved it in a scientific experiment, which was quite interesting. Personally, I've never done mouth rinse tests. But if you want to do a faster test, improve performance, then you want to try and maximize that performance, but yet maybe you're trying to lose weight and it's pre-season, then maybe this is a way of doing it. When it comes to up to 2 hours, you'll see there, like I've mentioned on the lower end, you could take in 30 grams per hour, which is a more lower carb intake. But once you're going 2 hours over, you'd want to try and look at 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Once you're going 3 hours over, then the recommendation is to go 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Okay, now this is just not something that's cast in stone. Firstly, if somebody weighs 40 kilos, taking 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour is pretty difficult. If you weigh 80 kilograms, taking 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour is probably a lot easier. Obviously, an individual size does play a role. I sometimes like to work on trying to get in at least a gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, if that helps you. If you can go higher, well, then that's fantastic. Okay. The kind of carbohydrates that you consume to achieve these carbohydrate targets are very important. You see, not all carbohydrates can break down at the same rate. Carbohydrates are unique. I once watched a video of a triathlon coach, quite a top triathlon coach overseas, talking about somebody consuming dates or bananas or potatoes or specific gels, etc., and saying, if you want to take 90 grams of carbs per hour or 100 grams of carbs per hour, then it doesn't matter what you take. But that's a big fatal flaw because it actually does matter what you take. Because fructose sources can only break down at rates of 30 grams per hour. So if you consume a fructose source, let's say you go with a fruit source, which is very high in fructose, like a date is very high in fructose, and you want to try and take in 90 grams of carbs just utilizing dates, you will get severe stomach, you will get gastrointestinal distress, you'll get severe stomach ache. Why? Because the amount of fructose in there is way higher than 30 grams. And so there's no ways your body will be able to break down that excessive amount of fructose that you're consuming. So this means that the type of carbohydrate that you're consuming during exercise needs to support the volume of carbohydrates that you are consuming during exercise. And this is where the big arguments come, where someone says, I take this product, or I take that product, or this works for me, that works for me. It really boils down to the kind of carbohydrate mix, the blend, and how that's going to be broken down and utilized properly as a fuel source during exercise. So fructose is 30 grams per hour. If you're looking at glucose, that's 60 grams per hour. So glucose, you can break down 60 grams per hour. And then you get the famous 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio. So the minute we take a fructose source or a glucose source, both of those are monosaccharides, by the way, and we combine them together in a mix. Okay, maybe we mix half and half. Okay, that if you mix half and half, if you mix 30 grams of glucose and 30 grams of fructose, what will that give you? It will allow you to burn off 60 grams per hour. Why? Because the body can break down 30 grams of fructose per hour. It can break down 30 grams of glucose per hour. In actual fact, I said it can break down 60, but I'm saying mixing a 1-to-1 ratio. Then you'll be able to get 60 grams of carbs quite easily. If you want to go to 90 grams, you'd need to use a 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio, which is a 60 to 30 grams. And then you get different kinds of, and we call that multiple transportable carbohydrates. So a single source carbohydrate would be only fructose or only glucose. If you look at table sugar like sucrose is actually a 1-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio. So if you're taking just table sugar, you could get to 60 grams per hour. But you wouldn't be able to go more because you'd probably get digestive distress. If you're going to 90 grams, you need to find a 2-to-1 ratio or some form of blend of multiple transportable carbohydrates that utilize those channels or maximize those channels that break down nice and easy to be able to support that. Okay, and this is very important because when it comes to sports nutrition, people mix the craziest things together and then they say it doesn't work. And we'll talk about soup mixes a little bit later on. Okay, so that's very, very important. Right. Let's talk about determining the volume or the amount of carbohydrates that you can take in per hour. And this is very important because the human body, when you exercise, you train your muscle. But on a day-to-day basis, when you're eating different foods, you're also training your digestive system, you're training your gut. And in order to be able to adapt to a higher rate of carbohydrate ingestion, you do have to train your gut. You can't just go, if you're training fasted every day, and then suddenly you go to a race and you're like, oh, I'm going to try the 60 grams of carbs per hour. It won't work out very well for you because you're going to throw it in your body. Your body hasn't adapted to that. And your body's going to go, hey, man, I don't know what to do with what you've thrown inside. I'm just going to just give you a lot of hell today. And it will cause gastrointestinal distress. So you do need to experiment with this during training. And if you are mainly a fasted trainer or you a low carb eater, you need to be able to adapt to ingesting carbohydrates. And you might want to start off on the very low side of things. You might go 20, 30 grams of carbs per hour, see how you feel. If you don't feel great, you need to keep doing it over and over and over again to train your body. If you're still not feeling great, then maybe you need to look at the kind of carbohydrates you're ingesting and utilize a different blend. Or, maybe you're taking them in a solid form. Maybe you should try liquid. Maybe you're taking them in a drink. Maybe you want to try a bit more solid, or maybe you want to try and mix it up. But whatever the combination is, it needs to be suited to that volume, and it needs to be able to be broken down quite comfortably and utilized as a source of energy. Once you're happy, let's say you worked on 30 grams and you went 3 or 4 weeks, you did some long runs, great, you feel comfortable, you did some intensity runs, you're feeling comfortable, and you decided, okay, let's take it to the next step. I'm going to go to 40 grams. So you incrementally build. You go to 40 grams an hour, great, worked brilliantly for you. Next step, 50 grams per hour, worked brilliantly. Then you go to the next step, 60 grams. And you can see why this takes time, because it's not going to be a week's process. You've got to do it over many weeks. You get to 60 grams and suddenly you're feeling some distress. So you're like, okay, that's not great, but we can work with it. We drop back to 55 or back to 50 where we were most comfortable. We carry on training our gut at that previous comfort zone. And then we step back forward again and we try back to the 60 grams. Does it work? Yes. Okay. Let's move to 65 or 70. And this is how you build up over time. If you do get to what we call the tipping point, which is the point of gastrointestinal comfort and maximizing your energy intake, and you can't go any further, and you've tried for weeks and weeks and weeks to adapt, but each time you try and build higher, you land up with gastrointestinal distress, you need to look at what you're consuming and maybe change the source of carbohydrates that you're taking in. Just on a side note, as a matter of interest, my last race was an Ironman about in 2020, end of 2022. I spent 10 months training my stomach to a particular feed. My comfort zone was sitting at about 70 grams of carbs, 75 grams of carbs per hour was my cutoff. And I switched to a different product. I tested it, and I built up. And currently I'm achieving rates of 115 grams of carbohydrates per hour. My weight is 66, 67 kilos. So that will show you how much actually I'm taking in. It's nearly double. It's nearly 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Never mind 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. It works very well for me. It took me a while to get there, and it really does. I find it aided me and helped from a benefit perspective. Is there a massive difference between 90 grams and 100, 120 grams per hour? There was actually debate in the coaches forum the other day. The truth of the matter is there hasn't been shown to be a significant improvement in performance between 90 grams and say 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour. So from a performance perspective, it's like, is it worth potentially triggering gastrointestinal distress to try and get to that amount? I don't think so. I think if you can get to 90 from a performance perspective, it's great. But where they have shown that higher carbohydrate intake to be beneficial is that through blood markers like CK or creatinine kinase levels and looking at liver function levels, these are things that analyze muscle breakdown, extensive muscle breakdown in the body. What they have found is that athletes that did this with a mountain run or endurance runners, which if you think about it would equate to same as Comrades, it's a very difficult route, a long period of time. The amount of muscle breakdown over that period, the inflammatory markers, the response, the recovery was way quicker and way better then for those people that were consuming a much higher amount of carbohydrates than those that were consuming a low amount of carbohydrates. And there they measured 90 to 120 grams of carbs per hour. So where would the benefit of 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour be? I would say stage racing for sure. So somebody like a Tour de France cyclist or somebody that's doing back-to-back races, recovery would be massive. And then maybe elite athletes that are racing quite frequently. They might have back-to-back weekends and they really need to recover from one race to the next, or massive training loads where they do need to recover as well. So, I mean, for those people that did 60K long runs and they were taking in 120 grams per hour and somebody else was only taking like 30 grams or 40 grams per hour, I can tell you now, those who are taking much higher will have a much more rapid recovery post-exercise based on the science that's being done. And that research study was actually done, I think, in 2021. So it's not something that's very, very new. But still, the science of the volume of carbohydrate ingestion, digestive discomfort, and performance improvement still has to be done. And I think we're just scratching the surface. So there's no definitive reason at the moment to have to take 120 grams other than that post-exercise recovery or post-race recovery. Okay. Before I go on to the next slide, let me just see if there are any more questions. Okay, I can't see anything as of yet unless I'm missing. Okay, I mean, I'll talk about that a bit later. I mean, there are some questions here I can answer later. Somebody mentioned price, but yeah, I mean, I'll speak about that. I mean, it is a very valid point. Okay, let's talk about how you should actually feed during an event. So like we've spoken about hourly feeds. Okay, you should never feed once an hour. Okay, it's been shown that actually I've read quite a few scientific research studies and done quite a few experiments on athletes as well over the last 15 years. But to be honest, the most optimal feeding time is 20, maximum 40. I would say around 20 to 30 minutes or your optimal feeding time. You should not really exceed 30 minutes without a feed. So if you're going to take 60 grams of carbs per hour, break it down into 30-gram feed at 30 minutes, 30 gram at 60 minutes, and you just clock feed. If you gain 90 grams and you can't take 45, it's too much, then split it up and go, take, you can take like 30 or 33 grams at 20 minutes and then another 30 grams at 40 minutes, and another 30 grams at 60 minutes. You can split it up into 20-minute feed. If you consume 5 or 10-minute frequencies, it's been shown to be way less efficient than taking 20 to 30-minute feed. So that to me is the optimal. It's not worth taking a feed once every 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Why? Because your energy system is like a roller coaster. It goes up and down. You want to stabilize it as much as possible. And so if the feeds are a bit more frequent, you'll get a lot more stability. And then over and above that, smaller amounts in the digestive system are much more easily handled than large amounts in the digestive system. And if you look at a sports discipline, I mean, cycling, the impact on the digestive system is not significant. But if you look at running, the impact on the digestive system is very significant. Each step you take, and if you're running a cadence of 160 or 180, has a massive force going through the body. Your digestive system has forces going through it at an incredible rate. And that's quite important to note. I mean, if somebody's weighing 80 kgs and they're running down a hill and they're running at a cadence of 160, I mean, think about it. It's 80 kgs on each leg, 80 times a minute. That's 80 times 80, 640 kilograms. I mean, 6,400 kilograms, 6.4 tons, if you're looking at that average over time. So it's crazy to think that doesn't impact you when it actually does. So you just need to understand that the impact is much higher. Also, heart rate is more elevated when it comes to running than it does to cycling, because you don't have that wind cool factor. You're going at a much slower rate. And so the body's core temperature, the heart works a little bit harder. And that means that the digestive system also battles a little bit more because you're diverting blood away from the digestive tracts to cool the body down. So that puts the human body under a bit of stress. So I think small amounts are also much better and more easily handled by the digestive system than larger feeds. Okay. If you look at this multi-hour system with drip fueling chart that I've put up here. I've broken down into low, medium, and high. On the low end, you can see I put there 30 grams of carbs per an hour, which is 120 calories. Sorry about that. And you'll notice that I've just broken it down. First hour, 30 grams, second hour, third hour, fourth hour. You can break it down into two 30-minute feeds if you want. And that would be the easiest. If you're going at a medium intensity, which I think most people will be going at medium to higher at Comrades, there's no way you should be going at a low intensity. I can tell you now that most Comrades runners will be running zone 3, zone 4. And it's very hard to stay in zone 2. Maybe early on the temperatures are lower, but once you're going through the different ranges, your heart rate's going to elevate. You're going to move into different zones, and you're going to wish you had fed very well early on, because later on you don't want to have any kind of shortfall. In that case, you're talking about 240 calories or 60 grams per an hour. And then at a very high intensity, they have gone to 90 grams. And you're talking about 240 calories, or basically a feed of 240 calories every 40 minutes. That's 60 grams of carbs every 40 minutes, where, yeah, it's only 60 grams of carbs per an hour. So it's a much bigger feed. And we'll talk about different feeding strategies. But so look, most athletes I've worked with, I mean, some that have run Wally Hayward's, which is sub 6 hour at Comrades, consuming anywhere between 80 to 90 grams of carbs per hour, and those are athletes that are weighing between 60 and 70 kgs. I'd say 60 to 65 on average. So that feed is actually quite important. The harder you perform, the more you need to take it. I would say that on average, most people would need to look at that 60 to 70 mark. But again, it really depends on the size of an individual, the height of an individual. All of these things do play a role, because the bigger, the heavier you are, the more energy you're expending, the more energy you want to try and take, and you don't want to leave too much of a shortfall. Okay. Okay, somebody's just asked me from a product perspective, but I'll get to that question a bit later. Don't worry, I will answer all these questions. Let's look at what a multi-hour drip filling. By the way, this drip fuel or fuel dispenser, I don't care what that is. I don't care if it's a bar, if it's a pouch, if you're squeezing it, if it's a bottle you're running with, if it's gels, if it's juice. It doesn't matter. That's what I call my fuel dispenser. You need to be able to carry it, and it needs to be able to support your route. It needs to be convenient. And if you've got seconds en route and it can help you, that's also great. But remember, energy is immeasurable. You need to know how much you're taking per an hour, because if you get that wrong, it can completely upset the balance. If you're in a deficit, you're going to hit the wall. If you are in an excess, you might end up with stomach issues, and that's not pleasant. Okay, let's have a look at, from a product perspective, and I'm using a 32GR product perspective here. What does a multi-hour drip fueling mean from a product perspective? Okay. If I look at 30-gram column, every single product supports 30 grams of carbs per an hour. I mean, if I look at the Race Pro Energy bar, I could take one bar every 50 minutes. The bars are 100 calories at 25 grams. So that will give me 30 grams an hour. If I want 60 grams, I'll just take a bar every 25 minutes. If I want 90 grams, I'm going to take a bar every 17 minutes. Okay, so you can see the difference in feed. Race Pro gel, you'll see those gels are quite big. They're 300 calories, so less than a half a gel every hour. If I want to go with 60 grams, a half a gel every 38 minutes. And if I want to go 90 grams, one gel every 50 minutes. I consume one Race Pro gel every 40 minutes to get in 115 grams per an hour. The Snap gels, you'll see, one gel every 45 minutes will give me 30 grams, but one gel every 22 minutes is 60 grams. That really wakes people up, but they take these gels. And by the way, the Snap gels are standard gels. Most gels that size in the market, doesn't matter what brand you're using, are around 90 to 100 calories. So it would be the same. It would be exactly the same. But there's a cross here at 90 grams. Wow. The carbohydrate composition of those gels do not support 90 grams of carbs per hour. I think they go up to about 75, 76. You can try and test it. 90 grams is a bit of a stretch on the digestive system, because the composition of carbohydrates utilized do not support that. A lot of brands won't tell you the composition and explain to you if it's suitable or not. And that's a danger zone. You need to understand the blend of carbs that's utilized. Sports chews will never take you to 90 grams per hour. Sure, you can get to 60, maybe a bit more, 90 grams, not the right product to utilize. Endure drink, again, 90 grams. That's why I put these crosses here. Chewable tabs, definitely not. The only products that support 90 grams or higher would be Race Pro Energy Bar, the Race Pro Gel, Race Pro, the actual drink, which you can mix into little bottles and dispense en route, or the actual race drink itself. Those are specifically designed for a much higher rate of energy throughput. Okay. Any questions there? Okay, still. All right. Let's talk about energy versus hydration because a lot of people make a mistake here. So never combine energy and hydration together. You need to think about it separately. Energy is a hourly measurable. Whatever you decide to take, whatever form of exogenous carbohydrate you decide to take, that will be your energy on the day. You need to understand the volume of that carbohydrate that you're taking and how much you need to consume hourly, and you need to stick to it. You know, a lot of people, they don't trust this, the strategy. They don't trust the plan. When it comes on the day and the body's telling them, no, I should have done this or should have done that, they change the nutrition strategy completely. Never change it. Stick to it. If you're going to go 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 grams of carbs per an hour, stick to that and never go differently. A lot of athletes I've worked with over the last decade, I mean, when I've given them a strategy and they've stuck to it, they get to the end and they go, man, I can't believe it worked. One product. That's all I took the whole way, and it worked so well for me. Absolutely. Because the reason a sports nutrition plan will not work is when you create a soup. Blending everything together can let you down in the day. Let me give you an example. Met a guy once. He wasn't, he was pretty novice at ultras. He had only done a few. I think it was Loskop Marathon. I think this is what happened. He went and ran it. Said to him, what did you take before? No, in the morning I had eggs on toast, and then I got to the start, and I took 2 gels, and then I went on then I took Jelly Babies, and then I went further, I had the Jungle Oats bar, and then I carried on going further, and I had a nougat bar, and I had another gel, I had an energy drink, and I said to him, you know, that's just the craziest thing. Let me give you that scenario, what it means in real life. You're not doing exercise. You get told that you need to make, your wife says to you, go make a vegetable soup. Yeah, make a vegetable soup. Okay, great. You put vegetables, you cut them up. Well, you go out the kitchen, you know, family's coming for dinner. Your wife walks in, she smells the soup. She's like, no, 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 I need to add a bit of spice to this thing. She throws some spices in without you knowing, maybe adds a bit of butter, walks out. And mother-in-law comes into the kitchen, says, oh man, these kids, they don't know what they're doing. I don't know what my son-in-law's doing, forget it. I'm going to add a bit of chicken to the soup, maybe a bit of beef. I'm going to just mix it up and, you know. And so what happens is the pot of soup changes completely over time. By the time it gets eaten, your stomach is absolutely finished. Doesn't know what to do with this concoction because it's never eaten something like that before. It's never eaten such a multifaceted feed before. If you're going to eat a vegetable soup, it's a vegetable soup. If you're going to eat a chicken breast, it's a chicken breast. You're not going to go and throw coconut oil and eggs and fish and whatever into the same mix. It's just the craziest thing. And when it comes to sports nutrition, that's what people do. They start to become desperate. They start to eat biltong, and then they start to eat nougat bars. Then it's Jelly Babies. Then it's a drink. And then someone says, hey, if you're in trouble, take this. If you're in trouble, take this. Why don't you throw some Miprodol into the mix or this or that? Before you know it, you absolutely have killed your day. The most simple nutrition strategies, one product, maybe 2 products, the most simple are the best ways to feed. Why? Because they're so simple, they're not complex, and they're so easy to stick to. It doesn't mean you can't use multiple products, but the problem is utilizing multiple products and getting those into the stomach at very similar periods of time. So I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you are using a gel and you take a gel and you're running, 30 minutes go by and you want another feed. Okay, but you don't feel like a gel. And you come past a table and there's banana. So you take a half a banana and you nibble on the half a banana. And then you run for another 30 minutes. Don't touch a thing. You come to another table and you're like, okay, you know what? This time I'll take another gel. And then you go running a little bit further. You don't feel like a gel. It might be a little bit sweet. Maybe you need something a bit savory, but you're giving time between those feeds to allow for proper digestion and utilization of that energy source before adding something else to the mix. You're not adding everything in at once. And that's the best way to feed, is to just keep it simple and keep that strategy as simple as possible. Okay, we'll talk about different strategies and how you can utilize them on the day. When it comes to hydration, it's not the same as energy. If you're relying on fluid intake per an hour, and you putting your energy into that same bottle, if it's cold, you'll drink less. If it's hot, you'll drink more. So maybe when it's hot, you'll get the right amount of energy, but when it's cold, you'll be in an energy deficit because you don't feel like drinking. You're losing a little bit less fluid in the form of sweat, and so you're not going to overload your bladder. You're not going to take on too much fluid. As the temperature climbs, you'll start to take on more. So it's always better to keep them separate. In the morning, your hydration status will be a little bit lower, and it will pick up through the race. You'll have to hydrate more and more as temperatures climb, as the core body temperature climbs, and you're losing a lot more fluid in the form of sweat. Okay, let's talk about hydration a little bit more in depth. Okay, proper hydration is aimed at replenishing around 80% of fluid loss. Okay, it's impossible to replenish 100%. There's no ways that you can consume the same amount of fluid as what you will lose. If you try that, you can end up in what's called a hyponatremic position, which is basically hyponatremia, which is very life-threatening. It's not something that you want. But it's not something that people necessarily will get to. There have been rare occasions where people have triggered hyponatremic symptoms, but it's a very difficult stage to be in. The best way to hydrate is to make sure that you understand how much fluid your body is losing, to try and sort of get an idea. What determines fluid loss? Okay, temperature, absolutely. If it's hot, you lose more fluid. If it's hot and humid, you lose way more fluid. Okay. If it's hot and it's humid and you're going for a long period of time, you're going to lose more fluid. If it's hot, humid, and you're going for a long time and you're doing more intensity, you're going to lose even more fluid. And if you're heavy and you've got a greater surface area with which you'll lose a lot more fluid. Okay. How do you calculate sort of how much fluid you lose in the form of sweat during exercise? It's quite simple. Weigh yourself before and weigh yourself after. Before you go out, and this is what you do. Stand naked on a scale, weigh yourself, get dressed. Okay? Go out and train. Come back, you went out at 70 kgs, you came back, you were 68 kgs. You lost 2 kilograms. 2 kilograms of weight loss equates to 2 liters of fluid loss. Okay. You lost 2 liters of fluid, you ran for 3 hours, let's say, and you basically, that means you would have to have consumed about 80% of that 2 liters loss, which means at least 1.6 liters of fluid would need to be taken in during the 3 hours. Take that 1600 and divide it by 3, and that would give you about 550, call it 550 mils per an hour. But let's say you did consume something during that exercise session. Let's say you took in a liter. Then your weight loss or your fluid loss is not actually 2 liters, it's actually 3, because you need to still take into account what you consume during. So it's actually 3, which means you needed to take in about 800 mils per an hour during the session. And that's really how I would calculate it. I think on average, if you're consuming between 600 to 800 mils on an hour when it's pretty hot, depending on your weight, etc., you're pretty much in the ballpark of hydrating properly. Once you're going a lot higher, if you're going over a liter per hour, you're probably pushing yourself into a dangerous zone. So I don't think that's a necessity. Another thing is that, and I've spoken to people before about cooling yourself down. If your heart rate is elevated due to temperatures, the way to cool yourself down, keep the heart rate a bit lower, is to actually throw water over your head, throw it over the core of the body. Don't drink it. Pour it over your head, core of the body. Definitely helps with lowering core body temperature and keeping that heart rate down as well. A simple example, when I worked with Nedbank quite a number of years ago, when Bonga Muslim Tembu won the down run that year, he broke away about 20 Ks before the finish. I was in the seconding vehicle, and we must have fed him. I counted about 23 to 25 water sachets. I can't remember the exact number. It was a large amount of water sachets. I think during those last 20 Ks, I don't think he even drank 3 of them. but he poured nearly every single sachet over his head to keep him cool. And that allowed him to perform at a higher rate without having to suffer because he was able to keep his heart rate slightly down. And a small percentage change can make a big difference. So that's just an example. The biggest mistake you can make is try to cool yourself down by drinking the fluid to cool yourself down, because then you're going to overhydrate. How do you know during exercise or during an endurance race if you've overhydrated? You get what's called the washing machine effect. You get the sloshing effect in your stomach. You can actually hear it and feel it. It's like this water going up and down in your digestive system. It's actually quite uncomfortable. What do you do to get rid of it? First, you stop drinking. The best thing you can do is take in salt. Ingest salt, salt tablets, cramper salt we've got, for example. Whatever you can, you take it in, carbohydrates, and wait for that fluid to be pulled out before you start to rehydrate again. It will come out, it will be absorbed. So with hydration, it's like a blocked drain. You drink fluid, and I don't know if you can see my hands here, but what happens is it drops little by little over time. If you drink water on its own, the fluid absorption of water on its own is actually lower than adding carbohydrates and minerals to the solution. So it's way better to have salt or sodium in that solution, and even a little bit of carb, and that will actually accelerate or pull through the fluid a lot quicker. So let's say your fluid pull through was about 150, 180 mils every 20 minutes. If you add sodium to that, a little bit of carb to that, you'll find that that rate of pull through will probably be 220 every 20 minutes. So you're actually increasing the amount of fluid your body's able to absorb. So I don't believe in consuming water on its own. If you take a gel, take water with it. That's very similar to taking sodium and taking carbohydrate together with a sachet. But don't drink water on its own in between. Rather take it with something. It's better to take it with a mineral, maybe a hypertonic solution that you're able to pull that fluid through and maximize your hydration and your fluid absorption. Because it's not about how much you consume in the form of fluid, it's about actually how much is being absorbed. And that's very important. So when people say to me, I hydrated so much, I really did, I drank a lot. And they tell me, no, they drank so much water. I drank like 4 sachets of water per hour. I'm like, you can't do that. Water on its own is not a good idea. Aim for something that's got minerals and carbs. You'll get a much better rate of fluid absorption. You'll feel a lot better. A lot of people have said to me, after I had my biltong and root, man, that stuff worked. It just made me feel so great. It did something. And the truth of the matter is, it was the salt in the meat that allowed for that fluid pull through that made them feel better. So that's probably what happened. They actually started to rehydrate because their sodium intake was a lot higher, and that made them feel a lot better. I'm a big fan of salt intake. I think it's very important in ultra endurance events. How do you determine how much sodium you should be taking and how much salt you should be taking in hourly with fluid? It is individual. But the way I see it is, in layman terms, let's look at a low, medium, high. Low being on like maybe between 200 to maybe 450 milligrams of sodium per hour. On the medium, maybe about 500 to 750 milligrams of sodium per hour, and then you can go up over 1,000 milligrams per hour. And then the question is, what I ask people is, how much salt do you have in your daily diet? What kind of a salt eater are you? Do you eat a lot of salt in your daily diet? And there has been some research that has shown that somebody that consumes a larger amount of salt in their daily diet will lose a larger amount of salt when it comes to sweat loss. So remember, when you're sweating, you're not just losing water, you're not just losing fluid, you're also losing minerals, and sodium is one of the big minerals that is lost during sweat. So if you're taking in and you're consuming and you've got a lot of sodium in your diet, in your daily diet, you're obviously going to lose that amount during sweat. So you would try and aim to replenish that amount. And that's really how I would suggest it. But if you're not sure, aim for a smaller amount, I would say probably 350 to 500 milligrams of sodium per hour. You won't suffer with that at all. Probably help very nicely with fluid absorption. If it works well for you, you can try and go a little bit higher and see how it goes. I would start on the lower end at the beginning of the race, and I'd actually build up and go higher through the race as you're starting to lose more fluid. And you'll be able to sort of gauge an idea, because through the race, either the temperatures are going to be cooler or they're going to be a lot hotter and harder. And generally, it's heat. It's increases in heat. And we know that Comrades, for example, any ultra endurance event is not it's not a short race. It's a very long race, and over a period of time, you definitely are going to be losing a lot more fluid as the temperatures climb. Okay. All right. Let me just see if there's any questions on. I think they're 250 mils, if I'm not mistaken, a water sachet. I would need to double check. I'm not 100% sure. But somebody asked how much fluid in each of the bags. I think it's around 200, could be 200 or 250 mils, the water sachet. Tash, maybe you can pop Dave just a message and ask him how much our water sachets are, because those are standards, and he can maybe answer. We can let him know. Maybe you can let us know. Okay. Just want to go a bit further down. So somebody asked how to separate hydration if using a sport drink endures a source of carbs. So it's a very good. I mean, you can use any isotonic solution, and Endure is an isotonic solution. First of all, you need to understand how much fluid are you mixing in that bottle with that carbohydrate. And let's say it's 44 grams of carbs in that bottle. How much Endure are you going to take something else with it? And how much fluid is in that bottle? And if there's like 400 milliliters of fluid with 44 grams of carbs, yes, you would need to take in additional fluid, and you'd need to be able to try and guesstimate or estimate how much fluid in addition you would need to be taking. The problem when you mix it together is like in the beginning, you might take very little sips because it's colder. So I would use another exogenous fuel source. I would probably add in something else as opposed to just utilizing a drink if you're only going to drink little. Because you see, if you're starting the race from 0.0 to kilometer, let's say 15, and that's going to be one bottle of Endure, that means you've got 44 grams of carbs in 15 kilometers, where I'm basically saying you should be consuming 60 grams in around 10 kilometers. That's if you're running at 6 minutes. Okay. If you're running faster, then you would, it would probably be 12 kilometers if you're going silver medal pace. But it's very important to understand how much energy you're taking in. And very often when it's mixed with water, you might end up in a calorie deficit. So if you're going to consume a bottle of Endure over 2 hours, great. That's 22 grams of carbs per hour. Where are you getting the additional 30, 40 grams of carbs from in that hourly period? Are you going to eat something along with that every 30 minutes to make sure that that adds up to the desired carbohydrate amount? And that's what I'm talking about. That's very important. So somebody mentioned, yes, the sweat rate in Johannesburg, which is more dry, might be a little bit lower than when you get to Durban, which is a little bit more humid. So you could add in an extra 100 to 200 milliliters of lost fluid per an hour, depending on the humidity factor. I guess I would check the weather and just make 100% sure. I think the nice thing, though, is Durban, yes, has higher humidity, but because the race starts very early in the morning and it's cooler, you might still be surprised that you might not lose as much more fluid than if you were exercising up here. And also, you've got to just, determine like what hours are you training here, what hours are you training, what hours are you starting there? Is it the exact same time, etc.? But check the weather. It's very important to assess it. I'm going to be at the Comrades Expo. I definitely have looked at the weather patterns, and I'll have an idea of the kind of temperature that's going to be panning out on the day. So if you do pop into Comrades Expo and you want to chat to me about it, I'm very happy to help and give some guidance. When it comes to running supplements, okay, I think it's very important to understand something before getting to this next slide. What an individual uses is very unique to an individual because taste, texture, the volume of carbs that he wants, whether it's a liquid or a solid feed, these are very important to anybody. If somebody says that I hate gels, I can't push them onto gels. I could say, okay, what do you like to eat? He says, no, I like to chew. Okay, great. So we look at edible food. And somebody says, I can't chew. I need to breathe. I'm running hard. I need to puff and pant. I don't have time to chew. I'm like, okay, then you need more of a liquid feed. And then the taste needs to be suitable. So do you like a fruit flavor? Do you like a chocolate flavor? You know, what are those? So once you've decided if you're a liquid feed or a combination feed, then the combination of products would be simple, to be designed to be looking at your carbohydrate intake on an hourly basis and how you're going to split that over 30 minutes. So, you know, for some people that use our gels, they'll take 3 an hour. Some people might take 2 an hour, but they might take one gel at 20 minutes, then take at another 20 minutes a bite of a potato or a banana or a nougat bar, and then at 60 minutes another gel. And some people might say, no, it's too complicated. I just want to simplify it. So I'm just going to take it throughout. So the energy feed is one thing. We'll talk about camphor salt and protein and also caffeine, which is another important question. I'll get to that shortly. Okay. Let me just talk about protein because it's actually quite important. So I mentioned earlier that protein can be utilized as a fuel source. So what happens over many hours of exercise? The brain is in control of your body and it says, hey, this human body is burning off glycogen, it's burning off fat. I need a bit of balance here. I'm going to trigger a process called gluconeogenesis, and this is where it breaks down its own muscle protein, okay? And in that chemical process, protein then becomes an additional fuel substrate to glycogen and fat. That process is not really desirable because it can lead to the onset of muscle fatigue. And that's not something you would want in a long endurance event. So that's why I'm a big fan of consuming protein, because I think if protein is in the mix, it makes you feel a lot better. There's a couple of reasons. It can maybe mitigate the onset of symptoms of gluconeogenesis. It stabilizes blood sugar because it's a protein. It also helps you feel a bit more satiated and not hungry. And that's a really good feeling, especially when you are going along. It doesn't have to be a large amount. So what are the ways of taking protein in on Comrades Race? Well, if you're using something that's already got protein in, I mean, I've got a Race Pro gel here as an example. It has got protein. It's got 8 grams. And your human body can break down 8 grams an hour easily. So if you had to consume one of those gels each hour, that would be more than enough protein throughout an entire race. But if you were just taking in carbohydrates, whether it was a gel, bananas, potatoes, nougat bars, by the way, have got protein in and a little bit of fat, but definitely got protein as well. It's also a source of protein. I have advocated taking in a protein shake, depending on the speed you're running at, but I would say at around the 40-kilometer mark. And then again, at 60 Ks, it would be worth taking in protein. I know some people stop and have these peanut butter sandwiches, etc. Over the years, we've given athletes our Recover product, which is a carb protein shake. They absolutely love it. Some people take in just a plain protein shake at the 40 or 60K mark. I would say maybe you could do it at both. Doesn't have to be a large amount. You can take in a half a serving. Don't have to take in 30 grams because that's just going to sit too heavy. But you can certainly take in like a half a serving. You could take in a 12-gram serving of protein or a little bit more, and that would sit actually very well with you. It does work. People swear by it. We've even used it with some of our comrades gold medalists. It's an amazing feed, and a lot of people request it en route. So that is something that you can look at taking, and you're just going to make sure that you enjoy that protein shake or that protein format, whatever it is, and that it does work for you. But remember, don't overeat it. Protein can break down at rates of about 9 to 12 grams, call it 12 grams per an hour if you want on the upper end. So you wouldn't want to go and take like 20 or 30 grams of protein at once. I don't think it's going to be desirable. You need to look at it over an hourly period. Okay. Right. Let me talk about as we approach race day, and then we'll get a little bit more into. I've got a bit of a fueling guide, and I'll just run through it a little bit with you. It's not finalized. I will be sending it out there once it is finalized by our graphic designer. The week before race day. Okay, very important. Keep it clean. So don't eat foods that are going to be impacting you negatively in that week. You don't want to cause any digestive issues. Whatever you eat, you need to eat for recovery and energy because you want to get to your race day in the best possible form. Don't drink alcohol. A lot of people think alcohol is great. Maybe alcohol-free beer is okay. It's a carbohydrate source. But once you add alcohol into the mix, let me tell you, it impacts the ability to repair muscle fiber. It doesn't, it basically prevents muscle protein synthesis. It does not aid the recovery process. It does the opposite. It prevents the recovery process. If you've still got legs that are recovering, and most people have, I've run blood tests on people and I've seen the muscle damage after the long run after Comrades race day. Believe me, there's still muscle damage lingering there because you get microfiber tears. I've seen elevated C code levels in the blood. If you want to repair yourself, avoid alcohol. It's a treat. Have it after the race. You've worked so hard. Why do you want to upset? Don't overeat. Another thing, you don't want to gain weight as you lead to race day. So don't go mad. Someone says to me, how much weight can you gain? I've seen people gain 1 to 2 kilos by the time they've gone to race day. They finish their training, they're going to taper, and then they're 2 kilograms heavy on race day. Now, even if it's 1 kilogram heavy on race day, let's work that out. So you were training at a certain weight, now you're a kilogram heavier. I spoke about cadence earlier. You're running a cadence of 160. 160 times 1 kilogram overweight, 160 kilograms. 80 kilograms of force on each foot per minute. 80 kilograms times 60 minutes, 4.8 tons. 4.8 tons times how many hours? 10 hours? That's crazy. 50,000 tons. It's not something that's desirable. Keep your weight consistent. Don't overeat. Make sure you're eating in a calorie balance. Don't go and eat in a calorie surplus. And don't go and eat in a calorie deficit because it can put the immune system at risk as well. Just try and eat in a maintenance. Hydrate daily. Make sure that you are hydrating. Again, hydration plays a very vital role from a recovery perspective. It plays an impact on muscle protein synthesis. It also helps with glycogen replenishment. 1 gram of glycogen is actually bound to 2 grams of water. And and so it's important to understand that you do need fluid to replenish glycogen as well. Sleep. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Immune system recovery, immune system health, muscle recovery. All of these are based on getting a good night's sleep. So try and maximize your sleep in the week before leading up to race day. 3 days leading into race day. Again, keep it clean. I'm just saying don't go mad. I once said 2 pro athletes, saw them the night before race day eating this monster pizza. Well, they didn't have great races. I wonder why. Reduce fiber intake as well. Fiber is not really a good fuel source, so it's better to lower it, especially as well if you end up with gastro distress, pre-race jitters, pre-race nerves, irritable bowel. Fiber can sort of exaggerate that situation. It's not something that you want to end up having. So reduce fiber intake. So instead of eating brown rice, eat white rice. Instead of eating brown bread, eat white bread. That's absolutely fine. Avoid any foods that you're not intolerant to. So if you are lactose intolerant, do not consume milk or any dairy products. I once had an athlete who was lactose intolerant who said she had to run into the bushes like a few kilometers into the run. I'm like, what did you have as your pre-training meal? No, I had a porridge with milk. I'm like, well, that's just great, but aren't you lactose intolerant? Yes, yes, but what must I have with it? Have water, have oats milk, have rice milk, whatever it is, but don't go and take something that you're intolerant to. Yes, alcohol avoidance is my favorite topic. I won't go into it in detail again. I think you've got the idea. Slightly up carbohydrate intake. So if you're going to up carbohydrate intake, doesn't mean overeat, then you need to drop another macronutrient down. I would reduce fat intake a little bit and up the carb intake. So you sort of, you can't replace, it's not a 1-to-1 because it's more like a 2-to-1 because of every 2 grams of carbs you increase, you can go 1 gram of fat down because a gram of fat is 9 calories and a gram of carb is 4 calories. Hydrate, mineral loading. Okay, so I spoke about hydration. You want to get to race day with maximum fluid store. Your water stores, your fluid stores need to be topped up. And the best way to do that is to hydrate. But I'm a big fan of mineral loading, so increasing your sodium levels and building up those water stores prior to the event. So I consume about 2 to 3 bottles of hydrate a day, morning, afternoon, not in the evening, because otherwise my bladder will just be overloaded, but maybe like morning and then sort of lunchtime and then early afternoon. And I like to top up my mineral levels leading into the event. And I do this for 2 to 3 days leading into the event. For a big event like Comrades, I probably do it 3 days before. But mineral loading prior to the event has been shown to have a benefit from a hydration perspective because if you're the same athletes and you've got the same size water stores and one's hydrating and mineral loading and the other one isn't, what you'll find is that this athlete's fluid loss will be at a slightly different rate. This athlete's will be at a much higher rate. So that's really what you're trying to look at. Percentage benefits here and there will make a big difference. Okay. And again, focus on sleep. Okay. Day before the race. This is the Saturday. Sleep in later. A lot of people say, no, I've got to wake up at the same time as I'm racing Comrades. What for? You've been doing it so often. You don't need to do it. Sleep in later. Maximize your sleep. Why? Because Friday night's really the last night you're going to get a good night's sleep. Saturday night, most people don't sleep. First of all, you get up early hours of the morning. Second of all, pre-race jitters, pre-race nerves, they sometimes prevent proper sleep at night. It's always like that with it before a race. And don't go take sleeping tablets. It's not a great idea. I know over the years I've met quite a few athletes that have done it. Sometimes they've got it wrong and it's ended up creating havoc on the day. It's been a bad mistake. Sleep in later, maximize the sleep, and again, avoid alcohol. Don't overeat the day before. There's no need to. I know these people go mad at these freaking pasta parties on a Friday and they go absolutely berserk. You don't really need to carb load. It's not a short race, it's such a long race. So what? You top up your glycogen stores, what? Extra 200 calories? And you're burning off what? Like 800, 1,000 an hour at some stages, depending on how you're performing. What's 200 calories going to do over like 8 to 10 hours? Can do nothing. If it was a marathon, it's a different story. But over Comrades, unless you Top Gun, it's not really going to make much of a difference. Okay. Again, mineral loads. At lunchtime, you can slightly increase your carbohydrate intake. Dinner time, a lot of people overeat the night before. I prefer eating a small to medium-sized meal because the dinner time meal is not going to determine your race, sort of your energy system on race day. The dinner time really isn't going to. Have something that's small. If you overeat at dinner time, you're going to battle to fall asleep. You're going to elevate your metabolic rate and you're not going to be able to sleep very well. People lie in bed, they're loaded, they're running backwards and forwards to the toilet, they're feeling bloated, they're feeling a sense of discomfort, and you want to try and maximize sleep the night before. Sleep is so vital. So please don't overdo it. Why do you not have to overdo it? Because the most important meal of the day is on race day. The pre-race meal. That is the meal that's going to set you up for the race. So pre-race meal should be consumed at least 2 to 2.5 hours before. If you can consume it even longer before, great. The closer you are to the start, the smaller that meal needs to be. The further you're away from the start, the bigger that meal can be. I would say on average, if you're 2.5 hours out, you could probably eat a meal between 400 to 500 calories. Okay. If you're only an hour and a half to 2 hours out, maybe 250 to 350 calories. If you like 5, 6 hours out, you can go to like 700, 800 calories. Doesn't matter. And obviously, the bigger you are, the more you can handle. Most important thing is that it breaks down, gets converted into blood sugar, and ready to be utilized as a source of energy. That's the most important thing for pre-race meal. You don't want to be having to worry about a digestive process at the start. Okay. What does a pre-race meal consist of? First of all, high in carbohydrates. Second of all, low in fiber. A small amount of protein and low in fat. Why? Fiber is no benefit. You're not going to break down the fat and utilize it as a fuel source. Carbohydrates are very easily converted into an energy source. Protein will also help stabilize the blood sugar response, and it will obviously be utilized as an energy source later on, but it will keep that stability, which is quite nice. Examples of pre-race meals. Okay. I've got a type of pre-race meal there. That's actually a pre-cooked white rice flour. I used to feed athletes white rice overcooked. We used to make it into porridge. We used to add a teaspoon of honey, a little bit of protein, sometimes a teaspoon of peanut butter, bananas, cinnamon. They would eat it. And it actually worked very well, which is why we made the pre-race meal, which is pre-cooked white rice flour. You can add some honey, banana into it, even a teaspoon of peanut butter. Mix it with water, hot water, cold, make it a porridge, make it into a shake or smoothie, and you can drink it. Other examples, you can have white bread. White bread with honey on and banana on, a little bit of peanut butter, Nutella, banana, a little bit of peanut butter if you want. That's fine. Oats also, it's fine. Yes, oats does have fiber, but some people like it. If you want to try and lower the fiber content, you can look for like a more processed oats, so like a more of an instant oatmeal. and that would be good. Obviously, better to have it cooked properly, because obviously the more granular it is, the higher the fiber content. And then you can add a little bit of protein into that. You can add some honey, add some banana. So these are sort of very easily digestible kind of meals that you can have pre-race. Somebody said to me, I eat like 3 or 4 fried eggs on toast. That's not a great meal because the fat content is very high. And I would go with a lower fat content and a high protein content. So pre-race, I would have like 5 slices of white bread or 4 slices of white bread, a little bit of scrambled egg white, maybe 1 yolk with a little bit of egg, with mainly egg white, if that's the fat. And then I would eat something like that prior to an event. So very, very different. And that just gives you an idea of the focus. If you've got some ideas and you want to share them with me, no problem at all. Pre-race hydration. Look, I love coffee before a race. Yes, it is a form of hydration. It is fluid intake. It's not going to dehydrate you, but I do like the caffeine benefit. It's been shown that if you consume around 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight, that's really what you want to do. So if you're weighing like about 60, 70 kilos and you're consuming around 200 milligrams of caffeine prior to the race, it can help free up free fatty acids and can provide a nice onset of energy that can be utilized during the event. We'll talk about caffeine during an event, but there's nothing wrong with that. And then you can still top up a little bit more on a hydration solution. So I don't like to overload my bladder because I find that, there's some people that just can't handle the fluid overload. I'm one of those people. So I'll drop a tablet of hydrate, but I'll drop it in a small amount of fluid to just top up my mineral stores. And then maybe I'll sip a little bit on water after that, but that's good enough for me. There are some people that can handle more, but it really depends on an individual. Okay. When it comes to caffeine, I think I'll talk about that now to bring up the feeding guide. Okay. So first of all, never arrive at a race without a feeding strategy. Make sure that you've got now quite a number of weeks. You can plan this out, you can calculate, and you can try and bed it down as much as possible. You've still got opportunity to test it. You might not be going on these massive long runs, but you're still going on some long runs. You can still test out how you feel. Remember to start low and build high. So digestive comfort to energy balance is required. There's a tipping point chart. We are going to share this presentation so you'll be able to see it there. Take notice of what you're consuming during training in form of liquids and solids under various weather conditions. That will help with hydration. And also take notice of your energy levels before and after a session. You should never feel a session feeling flat. You should try and finish the session feeling strong. If you do go out in a session, try and test your nutrition and you feel strong, that means that your fueling strategy was actually very good. Okay. If you've got any questions that maybe I haven't answered here and you want to email, you can still email coach@32gr.com and I will try my best to respond to those. They work on a first in, first out basis. Okay. I just want to bring this up. I think it's this chart over here. Let me just bring up a new share. Yeah. No, it's not that one. Someone's wrote there, salt and high blood pressure. Enemies, how can a person with high blood pressure balance this? So look, I mean, that is a very valid question. And I think it's very important to, first of all, during exercise, you are going to lose salt. So I don't think during exercise, okay, is not where you're going to have to worry so much about your blood pressure issues. The opposite, your blood pressure is going to change with excessive fluid loss. Okay. And the only way to balance that change in the thickness of the blood is to make sure that you are consuming enough fluid, and you would need to take a little bit of salt. During your daily diet, though, if you do suffer from high blood pressure, then you should be eating a lot less salt. Absolutely. You can't be taking in salt because that does increase blood pressure, and that is a bit of a problem. But over a long period during exercise, I can't see that salt intake is going to be of a major issue because it's going to be aiding the fluid absorption, which is going to be controlling blood pressure ultimately anyway. If you don't get your hydration incorrect, your blood pressure is certainly going to change with the loss of fluid. So my laptop seems to be freezing over here. Can you guys hear me? Just tell me in the chat, please. Okay, great. Okay, audio's good. Okay, I don't know why the presentation stuck, but um, somebody wrote caffeine is a big no for them because it upsets their stomach. So absolutely, there are individuals that are intolerant to caffeine, and so they should avoid it at all costs. However, there's a lot of people that are very tolerant to caffeine, and it does play a very big benefit in lowering the rate of perceived effort. So during an event, I mean, I personally consume quite a large amount of caffeine. I take about 60 to 120 milligrams of caffeine on an hourly basis. And I find that works very, very well for me. But you do need to try it in training to make sure that it does work for you. If you're a regular coffee drinker, then you're probably not intolerant to caffeine. My view of using my own energy balls, mix of oats, future life seeds, honey, giving the right carbs, etc. Look, the problem, there's nothing so wrong with that. The problem is that like, what is the actual energy intake that you're utilizing? Seeds are not a good idea, by the way. They just do not break down. They're basically very high in fiber, and anything that's high in fiber. If the energy ball is also made of oats, you're also increasing the fiber. So that's not an energy source. The only energy source in there would actually be the honey, um, maybe the carbs in the oats, and there would probably be from the protein as well. But you would need to, you would be very limited in the amount of carbohydrates you would get from that particular feed. So maybe you want to alternate that feed with something else. I just think it depends on how far you're running and the pace you're running. But look, there's some people that they utilize things and they're quite happy on it. Um, if that's what you've been doing in training as well, and it's worked for you over long runs, then I guess stick to it. Don't make any changes on the day. Um, I don't think anyone's I don't think anyone's uh, found out yet about the size of the water sachets. Um, all right, somebody asked about what's on the tables on from a 32 GI perspective. Sorry, I just want to see if I can get into this PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to stop the share quickly here. Give me one sec. Um, but yeah, somebody asked about what's on the tables. Comrades has only given us now 4 tables for the Nougat bars en route. And that was starting at 60 kilometers all the way through till 75. There's 4 tables where all those bars will be situated. The gels are not going to be en route. Unfortunately, they have decided to put the gels in the goodie bag. I would have liked some en route, but that's not going to be the case. And we maybe next year that will change. Hopefully it will. If we could carry on with the Comrades sponsorship, which we'll definitely try and do. I just want to see. You give me one sec. I'm just going to pull up this fuel guide that we've got because I think it would really be worth opening this and just running through it because I think there's quite a few. There we go. Okay. I think if I share my screen now, up second, I want to put it in. Okay, just let me know you can see this. Okay, there's a few things in this guide that we're going to send out, which is the same. I dropped the 30 grams for now because I don't believe that fueling should be less than that. It should be 30. I think it should be. I put a little bit of a nice explanation here about pre-race. So everything I've explained on pre-race, pre-hydration, and performance, speaking about caffeine, etc. What you should do waiting for the start, when the gun goes off, etc. What happens if you're feeling bloated, if you're getting cramps, and if you're getting an energy slump. So I've given you ideas on how to deal with that, and then just a little bit on how to recover afterwards. I broke it down into 15 to 30 to 45, 60, 60, 75, and then the last 10 Ks. I've broken it down into hydration and energy. So you'll be able to see with each of these 15 Ks. I put here in the first one, hydration temperatures are a lot lower in the early morning, so fluid loss is not as high. But just still make sure to take in fluid. It doesn't have to be a high amount, but make sure to take in. Take in energy every 30 minutes. Keep your stores topped up. Remember, how you feel in the beginning is going to determine how you feel in the end. For a lot of people, they wake up at like 40 Ks and they're like, wow, I haven't eaten enough. And then they feel in trouble. It's too late. It's too late for help. That's the roller coaster ride. Starting, it's going to be a real up and down roller coaster ride to the finish. 15 to 30, temperature increase, definitely core fluid. You're going to have a core temperature will climb. You're going to have to take a little bit more in the form um, of fluid. That might mean sodium intake. I've mentioned taking a cramper salt every 45 to 60 minutes. I would take 1 an hour, absolutely. It's amazing. It's a nice mineral gel. It's not excessive in the amount of sodium, and it really does work well. Energy, again, just keep the focus there. 30 to 45, again, hydration is becoming more important. If it's very hot at this stage, I would take a cramper salt gel at earlier feeds or salt tablets, but I'd probably take now one every 30 minutes, minimum every 45, but I would actually increase the amount of cramper salt I take to increase the salt intake. And then on the energy intake side, just keep it going. Yeah, I've mentioned taking protein. If you're not already taking protein at around the 40 to 45 K mark, then 45 to 60, just spoke a bit more on hydration, about throwing water over the head, cooling down, core area, etc. I wrote there that from an energy perspective, you might think, man, I can't handle another gel or another chew. You need to find a way of keeping that energy in. Small amounts, just keep it in. Switch to taste preference if you have to. Mix it up, but try and keep that energy intake as stable as possible. And then I've mentioned, yeah, protein in a shake at around the 50 to 60 K mark as well. 60 to 75, fluid loss is at its highest at this point, I would reckon. It does take very big focus. Do not neglect fluid intake. Small sips frequently combined with salt intake will help you feel good. Keep up that energy intake. Really try. And at this stage, you can start to take caffeine as well. If you start to take caffeine, like a caffeine shot, like we've got those G shots, if you do decide to take it, understand that caffeine reaches peak concentration levels in 60 minutes and then it hits a downer. So you need to take, if you're 3 hours from the finish and you start taking caffeine, you need to bank on taking caffeine 3 times. 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour. If it's in the last hour, once is great, but you need to make sure you keep taking it till you cross the finish line because you just don't want to hit that downer. It reaches peak concentration levels in 60 minutes. Please do not forget that. On the last leg, look, just keep cooling yourself down, keep hydrating, keep taking on energy. It's really like, sucking it all the way to the finish. There's obviously the last few kilometers are always the hardest in any event, but, just mental strength and toughness and just keep going, and to make it count. I haven't finalized these, but this will just give an example. I've tried to give, these are like favorite, these are more your social runners. I put about 50 grams plus minus per an hour. I've broken this down into gels, and then I broke it into a combination feed, which is like chew blocks and gels, just as an example. We will send this out. And this is a liquid feed only, but this is for top guns. These are guys that are going at a much faster pace, 75 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. I'd say these are your probably your sub 8.5 hour to silver medal or faster contenders. And these guys are going to be fueling more with the liquid fuel, and then obviously trying to get in the amount of carbohydrates. And I've broken it down into kilometers. Here, these guys would fuel every 6 to 7 Ks. On the previous chart, you'll see it's more like every 4 to 5 kilometers because of the pace differentiator. Okay. I've spoken about the benefit of protein and then also the add-ons, cranberry salt and the G shots as well as a form of caffeine intake. So I'm going to finalize this. Our graphic design will finalize this tomorrow. There were a few mistakes, and then we'll send it out. And then you guys must just feel free to let me know if you need any help and you want to get any additional help. Then just make sure that you touch base, and we'll try and help as much as possible by emailing on the address that we put there. I just want to see where that is. Bring up the PowerPoint. Put it up quickly. Okay, I'm just going to run through some questions in the meantime. Just let me see if there's a few more that have popped up. Quickly, just okay. Slide up quickly for you. Okay, so there's the email address again. The coach at 32gr.com. Okay. I'm nearly finished, guys. Just gonna check that. Yes, the presentation will be sent to all of you. So will the recording, the link to the recording. I am recording this as well. Will we consider second tables? Okay, so look, the 32GR running club will have tables on. If you want to utilize those tables, they will be fully stocked with 32GR products for running club members. We do have some international runners and other clubs which are coming through, and they've asked to use those tables. The club is charging for the use of those tables. If you're interested, then you can actually email me. Just put a subject header there, seconding tables on Comrades, and then I will connect you with the club chairman to arrange that. There's a big mix of products there in little bottles. We've done it every year. I think there's 4 tables that are going to be en route. So Roger, that was your question. Yes, there will be a possibility to utilize those if you need, but it is coming at a cost because the organization of those tables is quite extensive from what we saw, and they gave us a bit of a breakdown. So that's why they've done that. Okay, I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions here. Okay. All right, guys. So look, there's not many other questions. I really hope this is a valuable session for all of you. I love educating people. I like to see comrades runners getting to the finish line with a smile on their face. Please get there with a smile on your face because, yes, you've trained hard, but make sure your nutrition is there. Those 2 puzzle pieces, they just need to fit together to make sure that you are taking care of everything. Remember, it's about balance, not extremes. Don't create soups. Don't listen to the noise, please. A lot of runners, in different clubs, there's so much noise, and they're like, you should do this, you should do that. Don't listen to this one. Don't listen to that. I've done 20 comments. Do what works for you and shut the noise out and trust the process and try and get to the finish line with a smile. I wish you guys last couple of weeks of only health, no niggles, good fitness, and I hope to see you at the expo. Feel free to drop in and chat, and we'll definitely email out the link once it's ready and uploaded, I think, in the next day or 2, and the feeding guide will be sent out once it's finalized, as well as a voucher or a deal that the marketing team's offered. So Thank you very much for joining. Hope you guys have a really good month of May, and we'll chat again soon. I think there are going to be a few more comrade sessions, webinars leading into the event, maybe more Q&As, etc., for people that have got last minute doubts and need some help. I'll definitely be there to assist. So thanks very much for joining. Much appreciated, and hope this was valuable. We'll chat soon. All the best.